Hey, Cub fans! Thanks for joining us here on Cubs 24/7, where Randy talks Cubs with delight and optimism on a regular basis. Today we're going to talk about the 69 Cubs, and the reason I feel compelled to do it is the 69 Cubs team, I think, is the sort of the father of the modern day Cub organization that we know and love today. I think that fans are fans the way we are because of what happened in the late 60s. And I wanted to kind of break that down a little bit. We're going to talk about the Cubs, the debacle in the summer of 69, the September swoon that happened. But it's actually bigger than that. Obviously, that season was very interesting, and there was a lot in it, and we're gonna dive through that. We'll walk through it, talk about some of the turning points in that season. Very incredible season in itself. But I want you to think it's bigger than that. And what's interesting to me is when it really sort of hit me how big this season was. I can trace back my Cub fandom to that 69 year. I was born in 62, and I have vivid memories of that 69 season. And I didn't really know it at the time, but that was like perfect timing. My first exposure to the Cubs was that 69 team, but more importantly, it exposed me to the culture of the Cub fans. So as a Cub fan all my life, I've always understood what my goals are. And it wasn't to win the series every year. I don't have to win the series to have a good time. And I've often explained it to people that I'm looking for meaningful games late summer. I want a fun summer. I want to be in it. I want to see guys that I like play hard, and I want to have great home games at Wrigley and be at least in the hunt late. And we don't have to win. We don't have to win the division for me to consider it a good season. And I think that's kind of where Cub fans are in general. We want the team to play hard. We want to be at least competitive so that we have a good, interesting, and fun summer. So I believe that all started, that foundation started after the 69 season. So we're going to talk a little bit about that team. But before we do, let's do a little bit of a timeline. We were in the series in 45 and lost. That was the last time we were in the series before 2016. And from 1945 to really the mid-60s, probably about a 20-year run, it was pretty awful. There wasn't much really to get excited about during those time periods. And in fact, there was a couple of highlights that will kind of give you an idea how much of a struggle it was. From 1961 to 1965, our managers were a revolving door. We had what was called and referred to as the Coaches College. And ownership was bringing in different people from the minor league organizations to manage the Cubs. So if you think about it, we were a rudderless ship. We didn't have any leadership. And players were always complaining about getting different input from different coaches, and they just lost in it. And I thought that was a very interesting piece of information because I think it led to the trade of Lou Brock for Ernie Broglio in 1964. And if you're not familiar with that trade, you should look into it. It's a historic trade, one of those lopsided trades that are infamous in Cubs lore, probably the worst trade the Cubs ever made. But in 1964, we traded a young 25-year-old Lou Brock who hadn't really exposed himself for what he was going to be, which is a Hall of Famer. And one of the problems was Lou was trying to play for this team during this coaching college era. And he was getting all kinds of different signals, and he didn't know what to be. He didn't know if it was going to be a power hitter, if they wanted him to slap hit, if they just wanted him running the bases. And Lou was a little bit lost. So his numbers for the first 3 or 4 seasons, they were good, but they weren't great. You didn't really know for sure. But apparently the Cardinals knew, and they traded Ernie Broglio, a 28-year-old pitcher, who he was good. In 1963, he went 18-8. He had a sub-3 ERA, so he was good. Problem was he wasn't healthy. So we traded our young, up-and-coming, unknown Lou Brock for Ernie Brolia, who in 1963 went 18-8 with a sub-3 ERA. So you think we're in pretty good shape. Well, what we didn't know was Ernie wasn't healthy. And back in that time, the trades didn't have the physical involved, so we brought him in a 2-year span. He only pitched about 100 games and had an ERA right at 7, and then he was out of the league. So we traded future Hall of Famer Lou Brock in '64 for Ernie Brolia, and really got nothing in return, and that was pretty devastating. So that's early 60s. Then in 66, we made some trades that really sort of set things up a little bit. In 66 is when we acquired Fergie Jenkins. We got Bill Hands, and we got the catcher Randy Hundley. So in 1966, I'll say that's kind of where we started to turn the corner. And from that point on, we really had some good seasons. We had really good seasons in 67 and 68. Problem was the Cardinals were there, and the Cardinals won the series in 67. They were really good in 68, the Bob Gibson group, and we just couldn't overcome it. But we were coming on. We had Kessinger and Beckert that were coming into their own. We had future Hall of Famers in their prime. And in that 67-68 season, the Cub fans started to see us come out of it. We were playing competitive baseball, and the crowd started to show up and started to buy in. So by the time 1969 ran up on us, we were very optimistic, and we were looking forward to a good season. We had a lineup that was very formidable, and everybody thought, okay, this is probably the year we're going to be able to overtake the Cardinals, and everybody was really excited. So what I want to do is I'm going to walk through the lineup that we had in 69, just to give you an idea. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm going to give you some stats on each of them. But before I start, I want you to know that I've got 4 Hall of Famers, and everybody else is pretty much an all-star. I mean, that's how deep we were. In fact, I'm going to probably suggest that the 69 team is arguably, and on paper, probably the best Cubs team we ever had. And it's because individually at every position we were either a Hall of Famer or we were all-star material. It was really a fantastic group of players. So start with the lineup, how it looked back then. Leading off was our shortstop, Don Kessinger. In 1969, Don was 26 years old, and he had a fabulous career. He was a 6-time All-Star. He had received MVP votes. And in 1969, he hit .273, had 181 hits, only hit 4 home runs that year. Don probably only hit 14 home runs in his career. Switch hitter, no slug. But in 1969, the thing that's interesting, leadoff man, he walked 60 times and only struck out 70. And you just don't see that. So he had an on-base percentage of .332. He didn't run a lot. But he was a good base runner, and he scored 109 runs. So a very prototypical leadoff man, switch hitting, made contact, didn't strike out, good solid base runner, and he was an all-star defensive shortstop. So I think everybody would put a check mark by that we're covered at short. Our second baseman was Glenn Beckert. In 69, Glenn was 28 years old. In his career, he was a 4-time All-Star. He received MVP votes as well. And in 69, Glenn hit .291 with 24 bases on balls and 24 strikeouts. So you can see our top 2 hitters, or 1-2 hitters, didn't strike out. They put the ball in play. Glenn had 158 hits, only 1 home run. So again, 1 and 2 spots, no slug. Glenn had a .325 on-base percentage and scored 69 runs. And Glenn was an all-star caliber second baseman defensively. What's interesting about Glenn Beckert is that he probably wouldn't be there on this team at all if it had not been for the plane crash that killed Ken Hubbs. Ken Hubbs, Rookie of the Year in 62, and he's 22 years old. I think 20 when he was a rookie. And he was 22 years old, and he was killed in a plane crash between the 63 and 64 season. But he was our second baseman of the future. So when that happened, we acquired Glenn Beckert, and it took a few years for Glenn and Don to sort of gel up the middle, but they certainly had. And by 1969, we were as good as there was in the league up the middle in the infield with Kessinger and Beckert. Hitting third, we had a Hall of Famer, Billy Williams, our left fielder. Billy was in his prime in 1969. He was 31 years old in his career. He was a six-time All-Star, Hall of Famer. Finished second in MVP voting twice, and six-time All-Star. And in 1969, he hit just under 300 at 293, had 21 home runs, 95 RBIs. Doesn't strike out. Billy walked 59 times, only struck out 70 times. So those first three guys, they have a basically 1-to-1 walk-to-strikeout ratio. And today's game, that's unheard of. So our first three guys are getting on base, hitting for average, smart players, good players, all-star players, Hall of Fame players in their prime. Hitting cleanup was Ernie Banks. Now, Ernie was just a tick out of his prime, 37 years old. Ernie played his career at shortstop, and then a few years before they moved him to first base. But in that 1969 year, Ernie had 23 home runs, 106 RBIs. So he was more than serviceable, even though he was out of his prime. He hit 253, and as we know, Ernie was a Hall of Famer. So we had Ernie in the cleanup spot, playing first base. An excellent player, but not vintage in prime Ernie Banks. Hitting in the RBI spot in the 5-hole is Ron Santo, Hall of Fame third baseman. And Ron was in his prime. Ron was 29 years old. That year he hit 289, hit 29 home runs, and had 123 RBIs. So Ron had what we would call as a prime season in 1969. So we've got Billy, Ernie, and Santo, Hall of Famers. We've got Don Kessinger and Glenn Beckert, multi-year All-Stars, 1 through 5. In right field, we dropped just a little bit, but Jim Hickman was at this point a 32-year-old veteran. He had a really solid season. He only hit 237, but he had 21 home runs, 54 RBIs. And Jim Hickman had a knack of hitting walk-off dingers. So he was pretty clutch. And he was one of Jack Brickhouse's favorites. And I remember one time Jack yelled, "Hickman did it again." He just seemed to always come through when we needed him. And my memory of Jimmy Hickman, Gentleman Jim from Tennessee, is if you hung a curveball, he was going to hit it out on Waveland. And another thing about Jim that you might find interesting is, if you remember in the All-Star game when Pete Rose ran over Ray Fosse, well, the guy who hit the single to get the RBI to score Pete Rose was Jim Hickman. So we're solid there. In center field, we had a young third-year guy named Don Young, 23 years old, and he a solid defender up the middle. Only hit 239 with 6 home runs and 27 RBIs, but that was in the 7-hole. He was pretty dependable, but primarily a defensive center fielder. And he didn't have much of a career. That after this, he kind of faded away. You don't hear much about Don Young. In fact, if you're quizzing somebody about the '69 Cubs, and they're probably going to leave Don Young out. They're going to say, was it Bill North maybe? No, it was Don Young that got most of the playing time. Then in the 8-hole, we had our catcher Randy Hundley, super solid, the Rebel. Hundley caught 151 games in 1969, hit 255, had 18 home runs, 64 RBIs. He was 27 years old in 69. So we had acquired him in 66, and by 1969, he was ready to go. So you look at that lineup top to bottom, and we've got 7 out of the 8 were all-stars and solid players, most of them in their prime. Just a really solid top-to-bottom lineup. The 1 and 2 hitters got on base. 3, 4, and 5 had slug. Hickman in the 6-hole was clutch. And Hundley was producing down at the bottom of the order. So a very formidable team from top to bottom. Pitching staff is very similar. I'm going to talk to you about 4 pitchers, and that's really all I need to talk about, and you'll see why. So our ace was Ferguson Arthur Jenkins Jr. We had acquired him in '66, and they knew he was good, but they didn't know he was going to be Fergie, and ultimately have a statue of him outside of Wrigley. But in 1969, Fergie was just at the beginning of his prime. He was 26 years old, and that year he had a 3.21 ERA, a 1.14 WHIP. He struck out 273 batters. He pitched 311 innings. He went 21-15, and follow me here. He had 42 starts in 23 complete games. Yeah, I didn't stutter. It's 23 complete games. I don't even know what his pitch count was. You tell me. Maybe we should look that up. But Fergie Jenkins, ace of the staff, 42 starts, completed 23. 311 innings. Unheard of. Our sort of our setup guy, the guy behind Fergie, was Kenny Holtzman. And it wasn't prime Ken that we had. He was really good, but Kenny Holtzman sort of had his era with the Oakland Athletics when I think he won about 2 World Series with the A's. But in '69, he was just a 23-year-old kid, but he was still Kenny Holtzman, all-star. In '69, he had an ERA of 3.58, went 17-13, had a 1.3 WHIP. He started 39 times and had 12 complete games, and he pitched 261 innings. So guys are just pitching. They come in the game, they stay in the game, and they pitch every 4 days, 4-man rotation, and they carried the load. Our third starter was Bill Hands. We got him in '66 as well via trade. Bill Hands was right in the middle of his prime. He's 29 years old, had a phenomenal season in '69. Had a 2.49 ERA, went 20-14. He started 41 times, and he had 18 complete games with a 1.13 WHIP. I mean, you just don't see those numbers. Those numbers, and you look at the numbers and you just wonder, how did that happen? How did we have these starters do these numbers, have that lineup do what they did and not win the division? So if all we talked about was who the Cubs were in 1969 and what they did, it looks like pennant champs on paper. Our fourth pitcher, Phil Regan, 32 years old, and he was sort of our ace coming out of the bullpen. And he was in his prime at 32 years old. He had a good season. He had a 1.38 WHIP and went 12-6 with a 3.70 ERA. So there's some other guys on that team. Paul Popovich was a utility player. He had a nickname as a super sub, and we had a guy named Willie Smith that had some good minutes, good time with us. But for the most part, that's the group. And when you talk about the group, how many games everybody played, the number of games that these guys played outside of the pitchers, well, the pitchers starting 42 and 39 starts for Fergie and Ken, but the main group, most all of them played in 152 games or more. That was the lineup. That's who you saw every day. The manager, Leo DeRocher, wasn't all really into platooning. Leo was he played his guys. He put them in, put the pitchers in, and they stayed in. The number of pitch counts and innings eaten up by this handful of pitchers is unreal. But that's the way things were with the Cubs in 1969. And possibly we'll talk a little bit about how that came back to haunt us just a little bit. The 69 season, we're going to walk through that. There was a few things that I thought were really kind of high points, low points, whatever you want to call them, during that 69 season. But I thought the Cubs in '69 were obviously my favorite team, but I'm 7 years old, but I remember them being really good, and they were really good up until middle of August. So we'll just start off. Opening day at Wrigley, was the first party. Willie Smith came in and hit a walk-off home run. So opening day at Wrigley, 1969, Willie Smith hits a walk-off homer, and a lot of people describe that as the igniter, and we're off and running. Confidence is high. It triggered a win streak where we won 11 out of the first 12 games. So we go 11-1 in the first 12, and everything is clicking on all cylinders. That lineup is doing what you think that lineup is probably going to do. And we just sort of ran with that. We got off to that quick start. The walk-off homer on opening day, winning 11 out of the first 12, and everything is going great. In fact, Wrigley Field is such a party that on June 22nd, after a come-from-behind win against the Expos, we were down 6-3 going into the bottom of the ninth, and Jim Hickman ended up hitting a walk-off homer to beat the Expos 7-6. And Ron Santo was so happy, bear hugged Jimmy Hickman at the plate, pounded him on the head, and then Ron takes off toward the clubhouse, which the door to the clubhouse is in left field, back in that corner. So Ron's headed down the third base line, and then the place is just rocking. Ron is so exuberant that he jumps up and clicks his heels. He did it 3 times. So June 22nd is the first time the Ron Santo heel click happened. It was organic. Ron did it with enthusiasm. It wasn't pre-planned. And, of course, he did it. Well, the day after that, DeRocher told Ron he wanted to do it after every win. So that became part of what the Cubs are doing starting on June 22nd. On August 16th, we were 75-44, and we were 9 games up on the Mets. And I'm talking about just cruising. Then 10 days later, on August 19th, that's when Holtzman got his no-hitter. So we're at Wrigley. It's the 19th. We are, after this no-hitter, we're up we're 77-45. And the no-hitter was saved. It was against the Braves, and the wind was blowing in, 20-mile-an-hour wind coming in from the north. And in the 9th inning, Hank Aaron had hit a sky ball, just took off. On a normal day, it's probably out on Waveland, but the wind knocked it back in, and Billy Williams caught it in the well and saved that. So the game on the 19th of August, we saved that no-hitter, and that's probably the high point. August 19th, we're 77-45, and from that point, that high point, we ended up going 15-25 the rest of the way. So what happened? Well, we had this little bit of a slide, and we go from 9 games up to 5 games up. And the heel click became an issue. Other players and other teams didn't like it. Back then there was not a lot of showboating that was allowed, and a lot of the baseball world were complaining that was a little bit too showboaty. So put a little pressure on the Cubs, and they decided to go ahead and eliminate the heel click. So the first heel click was on June 22nd. The last heel click was on September 2nd. And that last heel click happened, we were 5 games up. So we had that 4-game slide, and I thought, well, maybe we'll get rid of that and kind of right the ship. And it didn't happen. 1 week later, we're in Shea Stadium playing the Mets for 2 games. And the Mets are hot. They are the Miracle Mets. That the recipe for what happened was a Cub losing streak for sure. And we'll talk about what caused that and what happened. But we can't forget the Mets just didn't lose. Mets played .750 ball in September. I mean, they won 3 out of 4 all of September. So it was the perfect storm of the Mets were literally just unrealistically hot and stayed hot all of September, and we weren't. And the 2 combined for a 17.5 game swing from late August to the end of the year. But on September 9th, we're in Shea Stadium, and Ron Santo is in the on-deck circle. It's a night game. And out of nowhere, this black cat shows up. Nobody knew where it came from. Scared Ron to death. And circles Ron Santo in the batter's box at Shea. It's black cat. I never saw a cat before, and I haven't seen one since. I've seen a squirrel, I think. But I have not seen a cat. It's a black cat. And that moment was just, it was bewildering. So the black cat was on September 9th. And, of course, the Cubs lost both games in that series to the Mets. So the Mets go 23-7 in September and finish 8 games up on us. So from 9 games up on August 16th to 8 games down at the end of the year. Pretty incredible stuff. So who do we blame? Who does the blame go to? Well, I'm going to start. There's some people that contributed to it, I think. We'll start with the Mets. You can blame the Mets. The Mets got stupid hot. I mean, you don't expect the team you're battling down the stretch to go so hot they just don't lose. And the Mets just didn't seem to lose. So the Mets. If you want to go toward the realm of supernatural, you've got the Billy Goat curse in 45. Then you got the black cat situation. A lot of people think the heel click gave us some bad mojo. The situation with Santo and Young, I think, is kind of interesting too. And I don't know a lot of people know about this, but during the thick of trying to hold on, Mets winning, we're losing, and one of those Met games that we needed to have, Don Young had made 2 errors, same inning, back to back, and Santo lost it. So the story goes that Santo had told Don Young that his 3-year-old daughter could have caught both those balls. Now Young is literally young, he's 23 years old, and this is Santo. I think the pressure got to Don Young, and this event when Santo lost it on him, I think it drew a division through the team. There was some people who were upset on both sides and some discord. So a lot of people don't know about the Santo and Young situation right in the thick of that. So that certainly didn't help very much. The other thing that I think we really should look at is, we went through the lineup and how many pitches these pitchers pitched and how many innings they ate up and how the lineup was the same lineup every day. And you wonder if, because DeRocher wasn't into platooning and he played his guys, if he just didn't wear everybody down. Did the pitchers just get worn down? In fact, there's an interesting stat around that where, and I'll just do round numbers on it. Before the collapse happened, like late August, the pitchers were giving up 4 runs an inning on average, and the hitters were scoring a little over 5. And then after that happened, those numbers literally inverted. So there was a clear statistical reaction during that period of time. So it wasn't just that the Mets got hot. The Cubs did cool way off, and they did it by having their pitchers being less effective at the same time their hitters were less effective. And now it all starts to make sense. So, guys stop hitting. Billy Williams was asked about being worn down, and Hundley said he wasn't, even though Hundley caught 151 games. And then they said they weren't. They're not going to probably blame that. But another interesting thing was when you looked at the Mets position by position, let's say with Bud Harrelson at shortstop, Bud Harrelson played like 40 games less than Kessinger did. And that was true up and down the lineup. So during the stretch run, there was no question, based on just pure playing time, that the Mets lineup was way fresher than the Cubs lineup. So, trying to lay blame somewhere. How did this happen? There's several different I guess, perspectives you can look at, but I sort of lean toward, I think maybe we did wear them down. When I look at the pitchers and how many pitches they threw and how many innings they ate up, it would almost be naive not to assume that we had some tired arms and some slower bats. So that's how that ended up. But I think it's interesting to see what came of that. What came of the 69 season, how that season set us up for who we are and what we look forward to now. So that 69 team was fun to watch. That's it's sort of like the 84 team was. Remember, we lost. We didn't win the first round against the Padres, but how much fun was that? How much fun is September in a pennant race? Anytime we get that, and that's the way it was in 69. I think Cub fans, they went to the park. They had a great day. The Cubs were competitive, and it was just a great, fun summer. And I think that's sort of where that started. That's what we were looking for. I think the players as a group were all very likable people, very gregarious athletes, and well-loved. Ernie Banks, let's play too. And Ernie Banks was a veteran on that team, so Ernie had been a Cub for a decade and a half, and nobody doesn't love Ernie. So I think Ernie's leadership sort of created that likability effect, and this whole group was there for so long together. And I look back, and that group, that whole group's my heroes: Sano, Kessinger, Beckert, Banks. Just these guys, I know they didn't win it, but for whatever reason, I don't care. It didn't matter. It still doesn't to me. I think Billy was talking about how they didn't make that much money back then, so they didn't afford two homes. So everybody lived in Chicago, so they were there year round. They were in the community. They were involved in the advertisement and mug giveaways, and they were just showing up, and they were available, and fans got to know them. You get to know these guys, and you root for them. In the late 60s, 67, 68 is when the original Bleacher Bums started, and the original group they showed up wearing yellow hard hats and spray painting bed sheets with blue spray paint with messages and signs, and we had a reliever that would egg them on from the bullpen there on the third baseline. So the Bleacher Bums happened. I think Jack Brickhouse is a big factor. Jack Brickhouse's enthusiasm, I think it was part of it. It's hard not to like the Cubs, and it's impossible not to like Jack Brickhouse. So I think he added to the likability effect. And I think that because of all of those variables, the expectation was set. What is it we as Cub fans want? We're not Yankee fans. We don't expect to win it, and if we don't win it, we're upset. That's just not how we see it. We want good play. We want hard play, and we want to enjoy going to the game and experiencing Wrigley. And we want to be relevant late, so we have playoff games or potential relevant games in September. And every time we have that, it's just so fantastic. And that's sort of what Cub fans are, and what we hope for each and every year. So that's 69. I feel very lucky that 69 team was literally my first team. I have a little bit of memory of 67, 68, but not much. But that 69 season, I saw that Black Cat. I was watching the game. I saw the Kenny Holtzman no-hitter. I watched it. And I have so many of my first memories, my very first memories was that Cub team. And I didn't know it at the time, but they set the foundation. That's the reason I am the way I am. And I think that the 69 Cubs are my favorite team in the history of baseball. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I certainly did. And thanks for joining us here on Cubs 24/7. And we'll see you next time. Go Cubs, go.